So we will be recording. So I want to introduce to you Wendy Watkins, who is the Emerging Mission Officer at Hadley Farm Estate, and she's going to talk to us about something that has been done in a previous appointment at Stepney, and that they were part of a project. So I'm going to pass over to Wendy. So I'm going to mute everybody. You need to unmute yourself as well, Wendy, when I mute everybody.
Yeah, that's fine.
Mute yourself, yeah. Okay, I'll hand over to you now.
Okay. Okay, it's really nice to be here. When Zena first mentioned about talking about welcoming the stranger, I actually kind of suggested somebody else do this, and unfortunately they couldn't do it. So you literally have me, all right? But the stories I'm going to share tonight are from our time in Stepney, and some of the stories are really hard to listen to. They were really hard to be part of, but I hope you accept those as stories of someone's reality. It's what we were dealing with at the time. There are some questions that I'm going to ask as we go along. They're there to challenge us, and hopefully we'll return to them during our conversation. So I wanted to start with, what do we think welcoming the stranger is? What do we think that means? And then I'm going to share two stories that I've had the privilege to be part of. There are over 100 different Bible verses about welcoming the stranger, found in both the Old and New Testament. And I really love that, when you find a constant narrative, a constant theme through scripture. And it means, because it's important, that it's something that we need to take note of. And while the Old Testament was written in a different time, in a different context, it too has advice about hospitality and welcome. Be sure to welcome the strangers into your home. By doing this, some people have welcomed angels as guests without even knowing it. And you can find that in Hebrews. And what a beautiful illustration of welcoming the stranger. And we can't forget that Jesus was, in fact, a displaced person, a refugee. How would we respond if the displaced on our doorstep was actually Jesus himself? Matthew 25 says and highlights our responsibility to care for the stranger and the displaced around us. Whatever you do and whatever you did not do for one of the least of these, you did not do it for me, says Jesus. For I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me drink. And I was a stranger and you welcomed me. I personally think welcome and hospitality are linked things. If I was to ask you, how good is your hospitality? I'm pretty sure that you would all say that you're very welcoming. You're very hospitable people. But the challenge is, are we only welcoming to people who are like us? To people who have the same cultural background? To people who speak the same language? To people who look like us? Or to people that eat the same food as us? And I don't say that to be rude, more to make us think and to challenge our perception of what it means to be welcoming and hospitable. According to the UN, and I'm going to share some pictures as we go along, just to help. So hopefully this will work. According to the UN, there's about 68 million people who have been forcibly displaced from their homes around the world. And we're familiar with this type of image. About 40 million people are internally displaced, forced to move within their own countries because of conflict, while over 25 million have fled to other countries. Some are living in very poor conditions, perhaps in camps with makeshift tents and little security. If you're anything like me, you read the newspapers, you see the pictures, you watch the news reports, and you feel overwhelmed by the sheer volume of misplaced people, feeling hopeless and helpless of what to do. You know, I watch the news reports and I just sit there sometimes and wonder, what difference can I make? And I used to think like that. But since my experiences, I know there are things that we can do to make a difference. Maybe not to the masses when you see that queue of people, but to the individual families. And if we all did something, maybe we could chip away at the crisis. In 2015, there was a humanitarian crisis, and it was occurring in our European borders. And there was an increasing number of unaccompanied children, unaccompanied refugees. And some of you will remember the horrific pictures of the dead little boy, the 3-year-old who was washed up on the Turkish beach. And you will remember the coverage that was given to those children and to that child. But the British press, we caught hold of the fact that many of these child migrants were teenage boys. They looked like this young man, and this young man is Bashir. Hold on a second. Let me move him along. It's all great when you're practicing, and then when you do it, it never quite comes. Hold on. So this is Bashir. I'll find him in a second, because it's important that you see him. And what the media in the UK did was they showed us images of young lads, young boys, and they kind of imaged them as that they weren't worthy of our help, that they weren't worthy refugees. And my first experience of welcoming the stranger occurred completely out of the blue. In late 2016, I had a message from the Oasis Trust that came through to ask for help to open a disused Salvation Army men's hostel in Tower Hamlets and turn it into a resettlement centre for unaccompanied child refugees coming from Calais. Bashir was one of those young lads. We had a 2-day turnaround to ensure that the centre was ready for the young people to move into. Stepney Salvation Army and a few willing volunteers turned the place around, and the 17 boys arrived in Tower Hamlets. All of this was done under a veil of secrecy. At the time, nobody could know what we were up to because everyone was concerned about the press turning up, taking photographs of these young lads. We worked with the Oasis Trust, who took responsibilities for the resettlement of each young person, including psychologists and health issues, and Tower Hamlets Youth Department also worked with the young people to support their education and English skills. Each of the boys had relatives already living in the UK. Children who were admitted to Britain were placed in temporary accommodation until they could be placed with their relatives or foster families. And some of the boys stayed a couple of days and others stayed for a couple of months. The boys arrived with a variety of mental health issues, including post-traumatic stress disorder, guilt, shame, depression, anxiety, and withdrawal. In addition to the conditions such as bronchitis, pneumonia, hepatitis, parasitic worm infections, and skin problems. And there were a number of memories that stick out for me from that time. But the welcome was completely different to what I had imagined. The boys arrived in the middle of the night. It was late. They'd been held up in customs, and it just took a long time to get them through immigration. And when they arrived, we thought that we were offering a safe place, but they were terrified. They were terrified that they were in a strange country, in a strange city, in a strange building, and there were doors that locked and doors to their rooms that locked, that made them feel even more suspicious of everything that's being done for them. They felt safer on the streets, and because that's what they'd become accustomed to. A local restaurant turned up with food for the boys, but the boys were so malnourished that they were unable to enjoy the meal prepared for them. And they immediately started a refeeding program. One of the boys' stories really sat with me. We played football and we taught some English words, and we practiced speaking English. And while we were doing this, he told me about his journey that started when he was 10 years old. He was now 17, and he was the same age as my son. And for most of his 7 years, he'd been walking from Darfur to Libya, Damascus, Italy, and France, stopping in safe places and seeking refuge along the way. His family started the journey together, but some of his relatives had died and others had become separated. He'd ended up in Calais for about 9 months in the mud before meeting us in London. As I look back on the Salvation Army's part of what we did there, you know, I was immensely proud of what we did, not because of what I did, but because of how we could be part of their story. It's one of those things that not many people knew about. You know, it was great to be part of something that you didn't have to advertise, that we just got on and did. And it was great to see their lives changed. And I was grateful for the opportunity to do something in a practical way to meet and welcome the stranger. My second story is the story of E123 community sponsorship. And for those of you that don't know, community sponsorship is a refugee resettlement program with local people at its heart. So community sponsorship is a shared endeavour, so that individuals who may or may not know each other form a group and work together to prepare for the welcome of a refugee family to the local area. And when communities lead the welcome, refugees benefit from the local support of the local people. So the group supports the family for the first year in the UK to live independent lives. They learn English, access schools, benefits, healthcare, employment, and participate fully in the community. And to give you a little context, Stepney Salvation Army is a small community-based corps in East London. When we worship, there's about 15 to 20 people on a Sunday. So we're really small. And we joined up with 3 other small churches who were based in our area, who we already had a relationship with. We all knew that alone, we couldn't do a community sponsorship program, but together, we had the potential to do something much bigger than ourselves. So in 2018, we approached our corps and asked them if they'd like to be involved in this project, in this community sponsorship to welcome a refugee family, and someone to lead the project from within the corps. So Ben Still, who some of you will know, and Ian, my husband, they co-chaired the group, and Stepney became the lead organisation for E123 community sponsorship. And when we originally looked at what we needed to do to resettle a refugee family, we knew there would be challenges. The challenges and the impossibilities of a small group of churches in London resettling a refugee family seemed at times impossible. That's why every step of the way, we saw evidence of God. We often describe the challenges as a miracle that we could participate in. So time and time again, we saw God at work. We thought the challenge would be to raise £9,000. So you have to raise £9,000 to be able to fill out your form to the Home Office to allow you to resettle a family. And Tower Hamlets is a place of real deprivation. But instead of raising £9,000, we managed to raise £22,000. And that number is still rising today. The Methodist Church offered us a house for the refugee family, and it was the biggest house that we'd seen at an affordable rate. And this was an answer to prayer, we thought. In a borough with a real housing crisis, finding a house that we could afford was one of our challenges. People offered us furniture, gifted items for the house, and lots of people from the community raised money through art exhibitions, quiz nights, baking, sponsored walks, and even our toddler group raised money. And some people just gave us donations because they believed in what we were doing. We were really surprised how many people from across our community, people of faith, people of no faith, wanted to get involved. We saw people who were part of the church who were not part of the church get involved in the mission of the church. And we saw a community come together to fight for justice. And people prayed from across the country for this refugee family who God already knew, but we were yet to meet. And then, in the middle of all this, a pandemic hits. And just when we were ready to go to the Home Office with our application, everything stopped. No refugees were allowed to travel to the UK. The Methodist Church got cold feet and decided to sell the house that they had offered us. And a lot of the work that we'd already done towards the family coming was just stuck. We were just stuck waiting. So we had to start searching for accommodations again. And the cost of the properties that we could afford just started to make things seem impossible. We changed our opinion about who we could resettle. Maybe now we could just resettle a couple rather than a family, because that's all we were going to be able to afford. And then another church stepped forward with a 4-bedroom property, 2 bathrooms over 3 floors. And the accommodation was ideal to support a larger family. And the extra money raised would cover the extra rent. We knew God was in this, and as soon as the government opened the borders to refugees, we put our application to the Home Office. This was quickly approved, and the details of a candidate family were sent to us so that we could look at the needs of the family and work out if we could support them. In February of this year, we welcomed the stranger. Our family arrived in Heathrow Airport, and then they had to go into isolation for 2 weeks. They were so delighted to be safe. They were overwhelmed with the accommodation, and they kept expecting another family to arrive. It was more than they had expected. They'd been told from their Home Office to expect something really small because they were going to London, and nothing prepared them for where they were going to come and where they were going to live in this beautiful, well-prepared home that our volunteers decorated, cleaned, made perfect for this family. The refugees described E123 group as friends that they didn't even know they had. This family fled from Somalia in the early 1990s, caught up in the troubles in Syria, and have been on the road for 27 years, stopping to take shelter along the way. They've been refugees for 27 years, lost members of their family along the way, and finally have a place to call home in London in 2021. We started this journey because we believe in transformation. For this one family, their lives have been transformed from all recognition. Not only their lives, but every one of their generations to follow, because of our small acts and because of God's great love. Their lives have been changed. I recently met the family at Stepney Salvation Army, they were invited to one of the family's dedication services, and they were there. And it was beautiful to see them in worship. It was beautiful to see them learning English and to see that they were settling well into their new surroundings. They were so happy to be there. One of the women from the family, she volunteers with the Salvation Army at the Baby Song Group because she used to look after children when she lived in Syria. They have lots of aspirations to return to education and to find employment. It's a wonderful story of welcoming people who were once strangers and who are now friends. And it was an immense privilege to be part of this. And they're my little stories for tonight. Okay, Zena, do you have any questions?
I've got one, if I may.
Yeah.
It sounded like you were saying that you got all the preparations done for our family coming. How do you, what's the question really? How do they pick which families get to come? I mean, are they coming literally from across a border somewhere, and they're just the next families in line, in a queue? Or are they handpicked, or how does that work?
It's all, so that is done by the Home Office. You tell the Home Office, so when you send in your paperwork, which is quite a big document, you tell them what accommodation you have and where you're based. They will have a list of people that's based on maybe some medical conditions, maybe what people have experienced, their need. So you're getting the people that are in most need of accommodation. And
where are they meanwhile?
They're held in camps.
Right.
Most of these people are held in camps, waiting for resettlement. Yeah. And the process is you send your form in, the Home Office then sends you a profile of a family, and you decide, can you meet the needs of this family? As a group of people, can you meet the needs of this family? And if you think you can, that's how you're matched. If you don't think you're able to provide what that family needs, the Home Office will send you another family to consider. But it is done thoughtfully, and there is a process, you know, and you're not given like a list of people to pick from. It doesn't quite work like that. It's you're given a family to consider. Yeah, that's how it works.
I find that all quite overwhelming, if I'm honest. Although when you say they're my two little stories, they're massive. And the two, I was just getting my head around the first one. The first one with the young boys. I find that was probably a bit more challenging because a family is a unit that are arriving together, even if they're in the worst case scenario, they still have each other. The boys that were on their own.
Yeah.
How did they have to prove that they've got family here before they can send them to their family? It's also traumatic to even think about for me at the moment. Yeah. Those families and those youngsters on their own and how they feel. But I think as soon as you start talking about a one-to-one planning for a family, suddenly it becomes heartwarming. Do you know, rather than overwhelming? You see the great big groups of people, masses, like we've seen on the news.
Yeah.
Of the people just waiting at Belarus. And it seems overwhelming, but as soon as you take out one family and you think, I can't do anything for everybody, but for that little family, we can do our best. Yeah. I like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wendy, I found your stories such an eye-opener for us who are I've not really been experienced that much around refugees, or even though I work a lot with people in crisis within the community, it's a completely, I think, a completely different situation. But what I was quite interested in was, you mentioned about the hostel with the teenage boys, and because of the experience that they've been through, you know, it was quite common for them to maybe have some issues with their mental health. And I think if you think about it, anyone who's been through the situation that they've been through would be struggling or have some kind of impact on their mental health. I just wondered if there was any impact on how maybe smoothly the hostel ran, when you had lots of the boys in the hostel, and they were all struggling with their mental health, but you also had the language barrier, and there's just so many things that must have been going on that it must have been quite chaotic at times.
I think there's a couple of things that are really important. Is they had a trauma specialist who was part of the team, and the trauma specialist was really helpful to, you know, to just kind of guide the staff, but also one-to-one with the boys. I don't think any of us can fully appreciate what those boys have experienced, you know, and so the trauma specialist was really a key person in that group. And the other thing is, Tower Hamlets has a large population of people from Bangladesh, so they're quickly able to get hold of translators and people from the community who could speak the language. And so, although we wanted them to have English, because they're going to go to English schools, and they're going to learn, they need to learn English to be able to communicate properly. Actually, at the early stages, we had good people who could communicate and translate. So that was really helpful. Yeah,
that must have made a huge difference, because communication is the biggest thing when you're in that situation, I would imagine.
Yeah, and also they look like 17-year-old boys, but actually they're behaving like 11-year-olds, because they've missed out on 7 years of growing up, you know, and their growing up experience has been very traumatic. So yes, they wanted to play football, and it doesn't mean that they didn't kick back against the system. Of course they did, but most of the time they were kicking back because they were afraid of the situation, and they didn't always understand what was happening to them next. That's where the challenges were. It was more fear than anger or aggression, or but they were like 11-year-old boys in 17-year-old bodies and afraid.
And these are people that you've worked with and that we're hearing about, who are kind of being processed through the process by the Home Office of integrating them into British culture and life and hospitality, I suppose. But there's a whole other sort of type of immigrant that is illegal immigrants, basically, who are in a process, but they're in a process of trying to get asylum seeking status or education status, or all sorts of reasons why they're allowed to stay in the country that isn't their birth country, and they're trying to resettle. And a lot of those people are completely on their own, aren't they? Completely. We're dealing with one at the moment at the Temple called Brooke. He's got very, very limited English. He's not the first person in that situation that we've helped, not at Hadley, but we've been in previous corps. We've had, in fact, in Darlington Corps, because we were on a main railway line from London to Edinburgh. That was the station where they got put off the train if they didn't have a ticket. So we ended up with quite a few people brought to our doorstep. You're the Salvation Army, you do something with them, kind of thing. And we did have a hostel, but there was no room in the hostel. So the only thing we could do with them in the middle of the night when they arrived was to give them a bed in our own home. So we've had a fair few of those, and we found that the way to communicate was to put the laptop on, and we type in English and put translator on, and it would translate into whatever language. So we had a Chinese girl who we could speak Mandarin with via Google. She couldn't obviously type back because the keyboard doesn't do Mandarin, but we could. We just got the sort of yeses and nos from her. We had to appropriate questions to make it possible. Yeah. But yeah, we had a lad from Romania, Transylvanian, an Indian boy that we found sleeping behind bins under cardboard. But these were completely on their own. They made their own way across, and they were trying to find work, and they were just trying to stay. And you know, it's the same story. It's an extremely very, very sad story, and you just want to do something to help. Yeah. But these are older, usually in the 30s, maybe that sort of age group, 20s, 30s, where they're looking for a new life, a safer life than the one they've left behind, but completely by themselves. Yeah, we had our eyes opened a few times with these folk, really. Yeah. And beautiful people. Well, the Chinese girl wasn't. She was a bit hard work, but all the others that we've had were really lovely people. Yeah. Yeah.
I find it such a shock to the system when you are in a situation where all that help and support that, to be honest, we all take for granted suddenly isn't there anymore. I used to work for a women's refuge, and we had a woman who came in who didn't have recourse to public funds. Yeah. And just the different standard of support that she was offered compared to everyone else was a huge shock. Suddenly, all of that support that you take for granted and that we put in place for everyone else, we were told that we weren't able to put that in place for her. And in the end, we had to move her to a different refuge because the refuge that I worked in, it didn't have the funding to assist someone who didn't have that right to remain in the country, which was really difficult and also frustrating, because obviously you're in that line of work because you want to help people and you want to support them through a really difficult time. So yeah, for me, all of that help and support that I take for granted, that I offer to people, when it isn't there, it's a real sort of, you feel like you're standing against a brick wall.
Yeah. 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 And it is something that you commit for the long haul, isn't it? It's not an instant, you know, we'll do this for you and it'll all will be all well from now on. You really are in it for a long time. I mean, even those people that we took into our home, we had them for months, you know, and there was no way that we could just put them back out on the street. That was the purpose of keeping them in the first place. So we just had to, feed them and look after them for months until something was made possible for them to move on to. So you really are in it. Once you're in it for a length of time. Yeah. But it is rewarding, really, really rewarding. Yeah.
I'm very sorry because I was late, so you might have already talked about this, so sorry about that. But how going forward into the future, what are the plans for looking after the family? Do you look after them until they become independent? Is that
through community sponsorship, you guarantee and you commit to a year after they arrive, and within that year you have to prove that you have a plan of how you're going to help these people become independent. You know, we were really fortunate. So not every community sponsorship has been as fortunate as we were, but we quickly had the employment people on our side who quickly talked to the people about, you know, English skills, improving their language so that they could work towards getting jobs. Because the family that we had were all very capable people. You know, that was evident. They'd learned English from watching YouTube. So a couple of them had bits of language, that they had learned along the way from YouTube, and but they just needed their skills, you know, improving, and to prove that they could use English as a communication, which they had to do. But the employment system and Popular Employment Benefits Office really supported our, you know, really worked with us and really supported what we were trying to do. So that was a real bonus for those people. But you commit to a year, and they have a house. You've got a house for 2 years, but the rent is all covered by housing benefits. So you're not worried about those things initially, because you've got that support and all in place for this family. And then after that period of time, the family may decide they want to move. They may decide that actually they want to go somewhere else, and they're free to do that. You know, we're not holding them. They're free to kind of move on and do what's right for them. We're there to support them in that initial phase and help them resettle. So yeah.
So where does you mentioned a 9,000, was it? A 9,000 that you have to tell the Home Office that you've got. Where does that go, or how does that work?
So the money you raise goes towards topping up housing. It might go towards buying furniture if you need to buy, you know, you're trying to have it.
You keep that 9,000, but you prove to the Home Office you've got it.
Yeah, you keep the money and you spend it on the things that you need. So you might need an interpreter. So you have to pay for an interpreter. You might need so we did have an interpreter's cost, and there might be things that you need to buy. They get money, given money to buy clothes. You know, they might need to go and buy some clothes because they don't actually have clothes. You know, some of them will need new clothes. So there's practical things that they need to have, and you promise to do that, you know, and that's what you need the money for. For us, the big issue was the housing costs because of being in London. Yeah.
Because 9,000 isn't a lot for a year, is it?
No.
For a family.
No. Yeah.
I can't think of a family that could live on 9,000 for a year. But
the
rent's paid, but still.
Yeah, and it's to top that up, you know. Yeah. We bought a computer, you know, so they've got computers to be able to access forms. Most things are done online, so they need to be able to do that, and you need to buy those, and a mobile phone to have access to the world, really. So all those practical things that people need to be able to settle. Yeah. English classes, if we need to pay for those, you need to raise the money to be able to fund that. Yeah.
I think for me, in my mind, I have a picture of sort of borders and countries holding hordes of people back and saying, you can't come in because we're following due process. And when they talk about processing families, it just sounds so inhuman, but actually what you've done is put a very human side to that process. That process is a dignified, considered process that, no, we can't all see the picture in how we're going to solve the problem for the thousands that we see at borders and on the wrong side of fences and squeezing into boats on the channel. But it's comforting to know that a due process is a very human approach. My question as well now is, if we can't be part of a big group that's actually doing that, how could me or anyone else that maybe want to help find a group that's doing something similar in our area that we could link up with? Is that too big a question?
No. So for me, Reset is an organisation that runs community sponsorships. They're the ones that give training, they're the ones that give advice. They're a great organisation, and they were really supportive of what we were doing and really helped us to navigate. We'd never done this before. We've also got Nick Coke, who he's got lots of information around resettlement of refugees, and these people are there to help you navigate it. So we never felt like we were on our own. And they've been there before us. You know, that they've already done this. They know how the process works. So these people were there to help us. But Reset will be able to tell you what organisations are running in your area, and you know how you can participate, how you can link up with them. Yeah.
Talk about the secrecy, particularly with the boys, because people don't necessarily want to know that what's going on down the road or in the next street. But it would be nice to know how you could link up with, you know, if there was somebody just down the road from us doing stuff, can we donate stuff? Can we help in some way? Can we make a difference, basically?
Yeah, I think it's really important to find out who's the lead organisation in those areas. So there may be refugee families already in Southend or in this area, and it's really important to work out who the lead organisation is and ask the question. Don't assume that we know what they want.
Yeah.
Ask questions to find out, you know, how can we support? What can we do to support what you're already doing? Does that make sense? Because I think we can assume what people need, and often we get it wrong. So ask lots of questions, try and find out who the lead people are. And it might be as simple as it's the council, you know, and so to go to the council and say, how can we support what you're already doing?
Thank you.
We actually had a lady come to our ladies fellowship at Carlisle just a few weeks back, and she was from Penrith and Eden Refugee Network. And I work for a housing association that houses refugees. And she actually said that nowhere in Cumbria had taken any asylum seekers. Well, I thought they were all the same, refugees and asylum seekers, and I found out that that's just not the case, that they're on their own, them asylum seekers. And she'd been taking caravans over to Calais. She's taken, I think, 3, and she says, I still can't reverse the car with a caravan on, but I've managed to take 3 caravans from Cumbria right over to Calais. But that was quite an insight as well, because as I say, I work for a housing association and I'm on the void side, so I'm not actually dealing with people, but just getting the houses ready. And I knew that every now and again they'd say, this one needs the key safe left on because county council need him because that's going for refugees. But as I say, I didn't realise that refugees and asylum seekers were different.
Yeah, they are.
Asylum seekers don't get an awful lot. Well, they get the ones that we've come in touch with, and certainly this chap that we've got, Wayne's helping at the moment. It seems that he's given the room that he lives in, and he's given sort of scraps of furniture. And when we offer him food parcels, he doesn't need them. He's got an allowance to buy food. So it's kind of the bare necessities that they're helped with. But one day they're just given a letter that says, all this is going to stop now. You know, you've got to go back where you came from because it's all coming to an end. And then it's like pandemonium. What do we do now? So obviously they come to agencies like us and say, with limited English, you know, what can you do to help me? I need a solicitor, and I need a solicitor who will work for free, who try and help me in my status application to get me to stay. You know, it's a big ask. It's a huge ask for somebody like us that hasn't got the experience. But they're looked after, barely looked after to start with, but then suddenly all gets taken away because they've had the time's up. So that's asylum seeking, or very, very hard. You just get to know them and suddenly they're off down to Bedford to live in the sort of what's it called? It's like an immigration centre before they're sent back home, deported home.
A holding camp or something like that, isn't it?
Really dreadful, because their stories are that they weren't safe at home. They had to leave. So
I can't get my head around the fact that somebody has been a refugee for 27 years.
Yeah.
I find that quite shocking, and it must get to a point where when you actually, somebody says, this is your home, you don't have to worry about your rent, you can live in the middle of London, you must almost be pinching yourself and thinking, someone's going to wake me up tomorrow. This isn't, you know, after 27 years of moving, that must be, it must take a little bit of, well, quite a lot of comprehension to actually understand that you can rest, you can stop and draw breath. There's just,
Especially if you're a family with children. Yeah.
yeah.
And that is, it's hard to get your head around that.
Absolutely.
You know, and this family travelled, you know, they were moving. It wasn't that they just arrived in London, but they'd been moving for a long time and living with other people along the way. And our family have grown up doing that. That's all they've ever known. Some of these people, that's what they've known.
Different cultures that they've had to adapt to all the time, different languages. It doesn't worth thinking about, really, does it? It doesn't.
No.
Yeah.
No. So to have a stable place, a place that you call home, we take for granted, you know, but for these people, it's like, it is life-changing. Yeah.
I think your story really shows just the amazing things that can be done when a community comes together.
Yeah.
I think that's massive. I mean, I'm not really overly involved in the community, but I find it such an eye-opener that actually people really go out of their way to really help other people, and the huge positive impact that can have on people's lives.
Yeah. And that surprised us. You know, we weren't expecting the level of support that we got, and people that we met, we were friends with, people that we knew, just turning around going, oh, I'm doing a quiz on this night and we're raising money for your refugee family. And it's like, oh, okay. And then, you know, we've opened up our centre for an art exhibition, and the money's come into your project and to E1T welcomes refugees. And that really surprised us. You know, it wasn't just us, it was a whole group of people doing lots of different things. And without them, we couldn't have done it. Yeah. So it was an amazing thing to see that happen.
But don't you think it's because people looked at this group of churches and they trusted you to actually do what you say you're going to do with that money, and that you're going to do it well? I think that's, I mean, we get there's a Salvation Army, then when people trust us with their money when they give it to us at Christmas or whatever. But I think you must have given off some very good vibes for them to want to support you in that way.
Yeah. It was just, I think people really, the thing that really mattered to the people we got to know is that this was an humanitarian crisis that all of a sudden they could do something about, that was local to them. And they, like you said, they trusted us enough to do what we said we were going to do, and they could do something to join in. So it wasn't something remote, you know, it was actually on their doorstep that they could be a part of. Yeah,
it stops being an item on the news and something that's part of your community that you can actually buy and work into, isn't it? I think that's that step between it being something that's too big and too bad for you to comprehend, and you can't see anything that you can do, suddenly becomes part of your community. And, you know, even people like Janice and Liz, you know, in the line of work they're in, they've got the opportunity to be that kind person. And I've got to say this, Heather, it's like, as one of our little girls, it's to hear about what you're doing and how you're caring for your community. I know you're not going to like that, but you know, and it's just so lovely to see you growing into somebody that cares in that way and that cares about the job that you do. It's very comforting, yeah, for us oldies, yeah.
I'm not still a little girl anymore, unfortunately.
Not to us, yeah.
Oh. We did have a lovely little story about a dentist as well, which I will share. I wasn't going to, but I will. So one of the family members we knew needed a dentist. He'd got some severe problems going on, and we couldn't, like lots of people, couldn't find a dentist, an NHS dentist, anywhere in Tower Hamlets, and it was becoming a real problem. And it's when the Salvation Army kind of works. So we rang up, the guys rang up, Ben rang up Nick Coke to ask for some advice about what to do. And it turns out that Nick knew a Salvationist who was a dentist, and that he would sort it out for him. So they managed to get this person to the dentist, but a Salvationist who did it for him for nothing, sorted it out for him. So I love those little stories, because that's when the Salvation Army works at its best, when we can link people up who all do their part. And that's happened since we've left. That's happened, you know. So this guy's now got the treatment he needed, maybe not in the way we would have wanted it, or ideally, but he did get the treatment that he's desperately needed, which is brilliant. Yeah, otherwise I think he'd still be waiting, like many other people. Yeah.
I think this is what I like most about what you've talked about, is that it's ever so easy, isn't it, to help an agency by putting a couple of quid in a collecting box, and then that's your job done. That's, you know, I've helped, that's as much as the help as I want to give. And we all do it, and I do it myself, so I'm not condemning that. It's got to be done as well. But to actually have a relationship with this family and to see the individual needs and how you personally can actually, you know, connect to that need and make it work is much more like you're bringing up your own family. You would want that for your own kids, so you want it for their kids. And I think it's just so much more what the Bible says, you know, take these strangers into your homes and take them and help them. Might not be into your own home at home, but it's still them becoming part of your wider family in that sense. And I think I think it is much more accurate to what the Bible says we are to do with the homeless and the stranger. And, you know, I think it's important that charities exist. The Salvation Army is a charity, and we exist by donations, but it is kind of it's a step away, isn't it? It's a step apart from actually helping the person themselves. And I think it must be, it helps everybody. Not just the person that you're helping, but it helps yourself as well, doesn't it? It grows you somehow as well.
And it's not just one person or a couple of people or one organization doing it. You know, it's a real shared responsibility, and everybody playing their part, whether it's you're the person who looks after the finances, whether you're the person who's helping them to learn to shop, or using transport, or helping them access the doctors, or accessing their housing, their benefit system. You know, it takes lots of different people with different skills to help them to do that. And that was one of the really encouraging things. It wasn't just one or two people, but a whole group of people just investing in them to give them the best start that they possibly could into living in the UK. Yeah.
I think you just said then people to help them shop. I suddenly felt a little niche for myself.
Let me introduce you to Ruby Rooms.
Ruby Rooms, yeah. No. Has anybody else got any thoughts or questions?
I guess the only question on my mind now is we were given a whole load of bags and boxes of things for Afghan refugees, we can't find any Afghan refugees to give the stuff to. So I don't know, how on earth do you track down these Afghan refugees? Where are they hiding?
I think maybe there's a question to go back to like someone like Nick Coke, who he'll know who's got the links, because people contact him, or Kerry, maybe go to Kerry and just ask the question, you know, where are the nearest group that they know about, you know, because then they'll be able to link you up. That might be the simplest way to do it, through the Salvation Army, but there will be, you know, maybe housing, you know, Essex housing, one of the housing associations, having a conversation with them to see if they know of anyone. But there will be some somewhere, definitely.
I would imagine that there's probably quite a few refugees in Southend, and it's possibly, just from how Southend local authority work, it's possibly all coordinated through the local authority. So it might be worth giving Southend Council a call. I should have said that sooner, didn't I?
Yeah. I think you're right. I think it's and also they may not be wanting to draw attention to where these families are.
Exactly. They are well hidden.
Yeah, and for obvious reasons.
Absolutely.
You know,
absolutely. It's like finding a women's refuge. It's very hard to do, and I think I'm glad it is. You know,
yeah,
we would want them to be safe and hidden.
Yeah. But if you've got things, and the council can be that facilitator, it's worth pursuing that, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. As Christmas approaches and we're getting all these toy and gift donations, you know, it might be nice to share them with some of these families.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
No, it's great. Thank you ever so much, Wendy, for sharing. It's been really eye-opening, and I've really learned. It's stirred up so much that it's going to be on my mind for quite a long, for different reasons. But it still makes me feel overwhelmed that there's not a lot we can do. But it would. Thank you for sharing. But maybe we could just spend a little time in prayer, just praying into people, this situation, and what we can do. So if anybody wants to share in prayer, I'll just open just to anybody now.
Well, God, we know that you are a God of love and of inclusivity. You include even the people who others would exclude. And so we want to follow in your footsteps, and we want to be inspired. We have been inspired tonight to do those things that we are able to do. So yeah, putting money in a collecting box is part of that, but you've perhaps given us a nudge in another direction. So thank you, Lord, that you're always opening doors for us to welcome people in, and you're always opening doors for people to be welcomed in. Your way of working is always this integration and inclusivity and all those beautiful things when people come together. So Lord, as we think about what's being said tonight and all the ways that we could feasibly help, then I just pray that you'll, like you're doing to Zena, just niggle our hearts a little bit and help us not to just put this away, but rather to think and open our hearts to whatever door you open. We pray in your name.
Amen. Father, our eyes have been open to one particular project, or maybe two particular projects tonight, where people have opened their hearts and their minds to welcoming the strangers in their community. But we know this is probably replicated across the country, and we just pray just now for all of those schemes, all of those plans, all of those processes, for want of a better word, that are going through at the moment that are making a difference to individual families around this country, that you you'll be with all of those plans. You'll be in those communities. You'll be in those hearts and minds to open and be generous to people who've travelled for so long, who've been unsettled for so long, but with so much to give to a community that welcomes them. We pray you'll be with all of those schemes just now. Amen.
Father God, I just want to pray for the family that are in Tower Hamlets. And I just pray for continued good relationships, for the continued support that they're being offered, and for their successful integration into the community. And Father, would you just bless each of the people that have been involved in that? And Father, we just want to thank you for each one of them. We thank you for the time that they've given and the support and love that they've shown. We thank you for each one of them. Amen.
Amen. Well, I just want to thank you for everybody that's here this evening. There's people that have joined together and the people that are going to listen to our recording later. We thank you for every heart that's stirred by your will, that's stirred by the Holy Spirit's moving. And we thank you that we're here and we want to learn. We want to learn about how we can make a difference, how we can transform lives. And I thank you and pray that you'll be with every single lady that's joined us this evening. Ask this in your name. Amen.
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 Amen. Thank you ever so much, Wendy. Thank you for joining us, and thank you. I think Liz and Rosemary are going to join us online later, so hello to them as well, and anybody else that joins us. We will be meeting again on Tuesday, the 30th of November, and Liz Hancock will be our guest on that day. So thank you very much, everybody, and good night.
Thanks, Ina, for organising it. Thank
Good
you.
night.
Good night. God bless.
Good night. God bless all.
Nice to meet you.
Night.
Bye.
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 Bye-bye, Janice. Bye-bye, Maurice. Bye-bye, Marion. Bye-bye, Maureen.
Bye. Bye all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.